Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, May 5th, 2025, and you're listening to Alex's News. Let's start with the weather in Riverside. Expect a high today around 62.3 degrees Fahrenheit, dipping down to a low of 53.7 tonight. Definitely a cooler day for early May. Happy Cinco de Mayo to everyone celebrating today. Coming up on the show, we delve into former President Trump's recent remarks where he seemed uncertain about fulfilling constitutional obligations and what that might signify. Then, we investigate a notable evolution in mental health treatment across the United States, exploring the factors driving a move beyond traditional pill-based therapies towards other approaches. We'll cover these important stories right after this. Stay with us on Alex's News. We begin this morning with story 1 of 2, focusing on some constitutionally questionable comments from former President Donald Trump that have certainly raised eyebrows over the weekend. Joining us now is our news reporter Ethan to break down what was said and the potential implications. Ethan, tell us about these interviews.
Grace, the former president sat down for interviews reported around May 4th and 5th, including one with Kristen Welker on NBC News' Meet the Press. According to reporting from NBC News and The Guardian, when asked directly if he agreed with Senator Marco Rubio that everyone within the United States is entitled to due process, Trump responded, quote, "I don't know. am not a lawyer. I don't know," end quote.
He said he doesn't know if people are entitled to due process. That's a cornerstone of the American legal system. Did he elaborate?
Not really on the principle itself. NBC News reported he gave that same, quote, "I don't know," end quote response when asked specifically if he, as president, needs to uphold the Constitution. And PBS NewsHour also reported him saying, quote, "I don't know," end quote, when asked if he supports the constitutional right to due process for both citizens and non-citizens alike.
So uncertainty about a fundamental right and his own constitutional duty. What's the context here? Why is this coming up now?
It's tied directly to his stated plans for a very large-scale deportation operation targeting non-citizens should he return to office. NBC News noted that Trump seemed to suggest that the speed of these potential operations might have to take priority over the due process rights guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment of the Constitution. For the average person, due process essentially means the government has to follow fair procedures and respect legal rights before depriving someone of life, liberty, or property.
So he wants to expedite deportations, potentially at the expense of those fair procedures. How did he frame that?
He spoke about logistical challenges. As noted in a summary from Perplexity API drawing on these interviews, he questioned how feasible it would be to provide trials or lengthy legal processes for individuals he described quite starkly as, quote, "murderers," end quote, quote, "drug dealers," end quote, and, quote, "the worst people on earth," end quote, during mass immigration enforcement. It sounds like he views due process as potentially slowing down the process he envisions.
It certainly sounds like he wants to process people out without no due process. How does he propose to navigate the legal side of this if he's unsure about the constitutional requirements himself?
That's a key point. He indicated he relies heavily on his legal team. Both NBC News and The Guardian reported him stating he would defer to his lawyers and the Attorney General on the legality of his immigration policies and other actions, specifically mentioning their interpretation of Supreme Court stances. He told NBC News directly, quote, "I will follow what the lawyers say," end quote.
But Ethan, legal experts must have something to say about this. Does relying on lawyers absolve a president of their constitutional obligations, especially regarding something as fundamental as due process?
Absolutely not, according to the legal analysts cited by Perplexity API. They stress that the Fifth Amendment's Due Process Clause and the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause apply to all persons within U.S. jurisdiction, not just citizens. The Supreme Court has repeatedly affirmed this, even during Trump's first term. NBC News reminds us of cases where his administration faced accusations of defying court orders related to immigrant due process, like the Kilmar Abrego Garcia case highlighted by NBC News and Perplexity API, where the Supreme Court ordered the government to facilitate his return after due process violations.
And what about the presidential oath itself? Doesn't that explicitly require upholding the Constitution?
Precisely. As analyzed by Perplexity API, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 8 of the Constitution requires the President to swear or affirm to, quote, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States, end quote. Legal analysts argue this is a binding, non-discretionary duty. They see his, quote, I don't know, end quote, statements as fundamentally incompatible with that oath. Personal legal knowledge, or lack thereof, doesn't change that obligation. Federal courts can, and likely would, review and potentially block actions violating due process, citing precedents like Zadvidis versus Davis and Hamdi versus Rumsfeld.
So a potential constitutional clash brewing. Thanks, Ethan, for processing all that complex information for us this morning.
You're welcome, Grace.
All right, for our second story this morning, we're shifting focus to mental health. There's been a fascinating development in how Americans are approaching treatment, suggesting the couch might be making a comeback against the capsule. Joining us to unpack this is our health reporter, Chloe. Chloe, tell us about this study.
Thanks, Grace. Yes, it seems more people are literally talking it out. A significant new study published recently in the American Journal of Psychiatry, led by Dr. Mark Olfson at Columbia University, looked at mental health treatment trends between 2018 and 2021. According to reporting from NPR, this study found a notable increase in the number of U.S. adults using outpatient talk therapy, also known as psychotherapy.
How big of an increase are we talking about?
It's quite substantial. The study showed the percentage of adults getting this kind of therapy rose from about 6.5% in 2018 to 8.5% in 2021. NPR translates this to roughly 16.5 million adults, up to nearly 22 million adults engaging in talk therapy. That's a lot more conversations happening.
That is a significant jump. And you mentioned a shift away from medication?
Exactly. This is perhaps the most striking finding. For the first time in decades, the study indicates a decrease in the reliance solely on psychiatric medication among those receiving outpatient mental health care. Perplexity API analysis highlights that the proportion of patients using only medication dropped from 68% in 2018 down to 62% in 2021 within that treated group.
So fewer people relying just on pills. Does that mean more people are combining treatments or just choosing therapy instead?
It suggests both are happening. The study observed an increase in patients receiving psychotherapy only that went up from 11.5% to 15.4% of those in treatment. As NPR points out, when you combine that rise in therapy only with the fall in medication only, it strongly implies an increase in combination therapy, where patients use both medication and talk therapy together. It seems people are looking for a more blended approach to feeling better.
Why is this shift considered so significant, Chloe?
Well, as Perplexity API notes, this reverses a long-standing trend. Since the advent of newer psychiatric medications like SSRIs, back in the post-1990 era, treatment had increasingly leaned towards medication, sometimes exclusively. There were even reports suggesting many psychiatrists had stopped offering talk therapy altogether by the mid-2010s. So this marks a real rebalancing, a move away from medication monotherapy, which means using only medication.
What factors might be driving this change? Is it all about telehealth, making therapy more accessible?
Telehealth is definitely part of the conversation. Both NPR and Perplexity API mention its expansion, especially during the pandemic, which overlapped with the study period, likely improved access by overcoming geographic or scheduling hurdles. However, the study itself didn't specifically measure telehealth's exact impact. And importantly, Perplexity API points out the rise in therapy use actually began before the pandemic really pushed telehealth into overdrive, between 2018 and 2019. So other factors like increased mental health awareness, perhaps reduced stigma, which NPR touched upon, were likely already nudging things in this direction. It seems the stigma is becoming less of a sticking point.
That's an important clarification. Are there any gaps or limitations in what this study tells us?
Yes, a few key ones. Perplexity API analysis highlights that while overall therapy use is up, the Olfson study didn't break down this increase by socioeconomic status or insurance type. Based on historical data, significant disparities in access likely remain. Things like psychiatrist availability, insurance reimbursement issues, often favoring medication management, and location still create barriers, especially for lower income or uninsured individuals. So we can't assume everyone is benefiting equally from this trend.
That is a crucial point about equity. Anything else the study didn't cover?
Another critical nuance, again emphasized by Perplexity API, is that this study focused on treatment patterns among people already getting outpatient mental health care. It did to not tell us whether the total percentage of all-American adults using any in psychiatric medication, whether alone or with therapy, went up or down. It shows a shift within the treatment landscape, not necessarily the overall medication prevalence in the general population. And NPR reminds us there's still a large treatment gap overall, with about half of Americans with a mental illness not receiving any treatment.
So a positive trend in therapy uptake within treatment, but questions remain about equity and the bigger picture of medication use and access. It sounds like a complex issue that needs more, quote, analysis on the couch, so to speak. Thanks so much for breaking that down for us, Chloe.
You're welcome, Grace.
That report drew on information from the American Journal of Psychiatry, NPR, and Perplexity API. Here's some other headlines. In Gaza, the humanitarian crisis deepens as Israel's intensified blockade enters its second month following the collapse of a March 2025 ceasefire. All aid, including food, fuel, and water, has been halted since early March, leading to catastrophic conditions for the 2.2 million residents. The UN agency UNRWA reports that flour and food parcels are completely gone, and a third of medical supplies are exhausted. Amidst this desperation, armed groups and civilians have reportedly raided UN and aid warehouses in northern Gaza since late April, seizing remaining essentials in what aid workers describe as acts of extreme survivalism. This follows recent Israeli airstrikes that killed 17 people overnight in the north. Palestinian officials report over 52,000 killed since the conflict began, while the Red Cross cites more than 47,000 deaths. The crisis, stemming from Hamas' October 2023 attack and Israel's subsequent offensive, unfolds as the International Court of Justice examines Israel's obligations, and a leaked Israeli plan suggests full military control of Gaza using private security firms. Turning to Europe, 80 years after the Battle of Berlin, the German capital still bears the physical and symbolic scars of the conflict that ended Nazi Germany in May 1945. The battle claimed between 200,000 and 380,000 lives and left the city in ruins. Today, unexploded ordnance is still found, and bullet marks remain visible on historic buildings. Memorials like the Soviet War Memorial in Tiergarten commemorate the Red Army's heavy losses, but also remain contested symbols. The battle's trauma continues to shape Berlin's identity and cultural memory. In the United States, a massive coastal restoration project in Louisiana is reportedly in peril. There are allegations that the state concealed a critical report concerning the Mid-Barataria Sediment Diversion Project, which aims to use Mississippi River sediment to rebuild eroded wetlands. While details of the alleged concealment are unclear, the project already faces significant legal challenges and controversy. This comes despite Louisiana approving a record $1.71 billion budget for coastal protection and restoration for fiscal year 2025. In business news, Berkshire Hathaway has announced a major leadership transition. Warren Buffett will remain chairman, while Greg Abel, currently vice chairman of non-insurance operations, will take over as CEO and president effective January 1, 2026. The move is part of a long-anticipated succession plan for the 94-year-old Buffett. Abel, aged 62, will assume full operational authority, overseeing the company's significant $347 billion cash reserves. And finally, Students in South Dakota are planning protests against a university's decision to award an honorary doctorate to U.S. Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. The protest, scheduled for graduation day on May 10th, cites opposition to federal immigration policies under Noem and her past actions against the LGBT community as governor. Students and some faculty feel the honor is inappropriate, rallying under the message, "No honor for Noem." That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King, with Claude Sonnet 3.7, Gemini Pro 2.5 Experimental, Gemini Flash 2.0, Perplexity Sonar Pro, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.